Please help me in welcoming Miss Charlotte Beers.
I don't see why I need to talk. Emily got the gist of it. So I love Chicago. You know, I did everything, learned everything here, from the smallest to the widest. And then I got tapped for this big fat job in New York. I took all of us with me and taught those hard-headed New Yorkers a thing or two. And look at this room. I mean, it's just full of my kind of women. And I have to say there are a couple of hats in here that are drop dead. You got to check them out. Some are over there. So I was looking at your agenda, and I thought, wow, I would love to go to this session. It says, say what you mean and get what you want. And then I thought, I am going to that session. Somebody wrote that title who was very optimistic about our ability to communicate with one another today. That's a big agenda. It's actually not that easy to say what you mean if you've ever been married. Worse, in love. But the reason for that in business that makes it so difficult is we put such a premium on what we know rather than what we think and believe. So I'm going to ask you to walk with me on this apparent paradox. The harder you work, the more you're trapped in the work, and the less you focus on what matters more than the work, which is the relationships. So now we're going to take that apart a little bit so that you understand how this comes to be. Who you are is how you manage ultimately to communicate with power. But the trouble is very few of us, and I know because I've been teaching executive women for many years now, and I'm appalled at how poorly they are at describing who they are past their resume and what somebody said in a review. This really ticks me off. When Emily quotes me, thank you, Emily, for saying, keep your own scorecard. The heart of that means you say to yourself how you're doing. You stand on your own respect and interior knowledge. And whatever someone tells you is definitely interesting, but may not even be relevant. The thing I hate the most in the world, those 360-degree reviews written anonymously by some person who may not be that knowledgeable. Yes, I did correct. You caught me. I'm not at the dinner table. So we want you to know your behavior, your convictions, your beliefs. You know, people are watching you all the time, and they're not just listening to the one or two words or your fantastic PowerPoints. They're watching your behavior, what you're emoting, what you're evoking, how you react in certain circumstances. This could all be a surprise to you because you haven't done your homework about who you really are. And you know, the most fabulous thing about work is that you get to learn about a different dimension of yourself. And it's the one place where you can step aside in a kind of neutral way, watch yourself. Very hard to do that at home in the middle of a fist fight, or even with your children who drive you crazy. So in a way, work is more neutral. Now let's get straight why you work. Yes, I want you to be rich and famous, but that's not why you work. Why you work is because you are given the great privilege of not only learning who you are as you watch yourself interact with people in the marketplace, but you get to constantly try to enlarge that sense of who you are. So when you're on the rocking chair 100 years from now, you'll say, that wasn't so bad. And it does give your life meaning. You're going to spend endless hours at work. Look at me, this is my 4th retirement. Honey, get ready. So as long as you're going to go, do a couple of things. Don't take it so seriously. Women are far more earnest than men. I see a few men here, they're always going to be laughing more than you are. Knock it off. Loosen up. Get to the disarming, frolicsome side of life. What do you think about women? Hey, women are seductive. Nobody calls a man seductive. Well, maybe they do. I don't know. The point is, you have weapons and ways of being that are not only female, but uniquely yours. So your job, in addition to your job, is to discover what is true and unique about you. Now, this is not easy because we're not even encouraged to do that kind of self-analysis. So part of the way, and men don't have that opportunity often easily either. So the way you do this is watch yourself when you're in the game, and most of the time who you really are comes out in a moment of crisis, in a moment of competition. In that moment, Emily witnessed so beautifully. And then you see something working there. And you see something about who you are and what your feelings are made of. If you don't know who you are, you're doomed. You're doomed to copy others. You're destined to let someone's evaluation of you write your script. I got 1,000 stories like that. I made every one of those mistakes. I copied the first boss I ever had, who was the meanest cowboy in the world in Texas. And so when I finally got promoted to a position of power, I thought I was a Southern belle at J. Walter Thompson here in Chicago. And one of the management supervisors laughingly said that the guy down the hall, I didn't like him either, said, "He says you manage by threat." And I thought, me, the girl? It turned out I was watch myself. I ended every meeting with a sense of false urgency, with a bit of implied penalty. Why did I do that? I did that because I thought you had to do that to prove you meant business. I copied somebody completely out of my own way, although I do like a sense of urgency every now and then. But think about who you've copied. Think about what people have said about you. When I was young, a brilliant man I adored said to me, I have a degree in math and a minor of physics, so I'm in advertising. And he said, "You use that great mathematical mind of yours to kill new ideas." Well, I was devastated. I thought I couldn't take part in the creative process, which, believe me, is the game. And for about a year, I was truly muffled until I started thinking. I've said all that before we left the room and I began to play again. But I allowed his assessment of me, even though he's a very talented guy, to write my script. And when I learned not to do that, I was much stronger for it. Well, don't take a year. Start assessing. You can take in, but you don't take to heart that which people say to you. This is the reason I wrote this book. It's called I'd Rather Be in Charge, and I really wanted to call it I'd Rather You Be in Charge. But I have a friend who is a guy who is a little racy, and he said, "You'd have had a bestseller, honey, if you had just said, I'd rather be on top." I'm rethinking it. So why I like this book is certainly not for the money, but because in the book and with other women, I've seen these women I've been teaching over the years use the process that I copied myself to make the journey of self-discovery. So don't try to get what you want and to say what you mean without being really clear for whom you are speaking. And that's you. And you know what? What's beautiful about that journey is you'll find in yourself that which belongs only to you. It's not even from your family, your gene pool. There is a characteristic of yours that belongs to you and will direct how you should spend your time at work. For example, it took me many years to learn that my unique trait after junior high and high school and college and all those things that give you a mirror of yourself, I was sent to the principals for organizing a team and having them eat my food so I could go back for seconds. I mean, this is not nice. I had several hundred stories. I spoke so much in my first client meeting, the client came back and said, "Don't bring the mouthy one back." It was not a great beginning. So here's my trait. All things being equal, I'd just rather be in charge. There comes my way. And you know what? It guided me. It wasn't my family's fault. We had many other ways to be. But when I learned that that trait of mine was prominent in me, it guided the work I did. Now you have another trait you'll discover when you go through the process that comes directly from your family like a feeder system. Generally speaking, most of us carry these two ways of working through those traits out of these two sources. And in my family, that family genetic pass along was a lethal impatience. My father, a very tricky character, took my daughter fishing. She got her pole out, and he stood up and said, "Hell, there are no fish in here, let's go." Impatience. Now you marry impatience with "I'd rather be in charge." No one wants to marry anybody like that. Actually, some people did, but look what it tells me about the kind of work I ought to be doing. So if you want me to go work in an area that's going beautifully and it's just a matter of managing it and collaborating, I'm not your girl, because I'm interested in fomenting some change. But I have been hired 3 times in big places to change things dramatically. And that's really been a shaping of my career. Now you need to know these things about yourself. It is priceless to know what's unique about you. And when I've had the privilege of conducting these deeper workshops that I run sometimes, I am amazed at what emerges. I'll just tell you a fast story. I have the women do a self-portrait, and that's part of what I'd like to ask you to do today if we had 17 hours. Because it's a long process. You start with nothing useful, and then you finally move back. The men could really be good at this. I can see you know that portrait, but her portrait was a mother hen with all the chicks around. Do you think I like that? I did not like that. Come on. So she worked through this process that I'm urging you to take part in, even though I'm describing it so briefly. And she said, "You know, I've been thinking about who I am. And when I was 18, I walked into my family's home." She's from a matriarchal community. Her mothers and her sisters ran the universe for them and did a beautiful job. This is a very beautiful history. But maybe you don't take all your personal history to work. And so Mother Hen works at home. What works at work? And she remembered when she was 18, she walked in and said, "I'm taking a trip," and left for 18 months. That's not Mother Hen-like, is it? And she did several things like that where she just took off, made a leap. So she's in the room, she's ready, she's got her portrait. And these 2 guys are talking about a job opening. They're not even thinking of her. She's sitting behind them. She walks around to the front of them and said, "I'll take it." They were so shocked they gave it to her. You know what she calls her trait? The one you're going after? Covert bravery. Is that cool? I mean, it's so inspiring to realize that she now has unfolded the mother hen thing, and she's moving to this kind of "watch out, I'm braver than I look" thing. So what you learn when you trade all that's been brought and laid on you as a facade of who you are, begin to shed what's unnecessary, magnify what's great, you can become closer and closer to personal clarity. No great communication ever takes place without personal clarity, because you're speaking for someone else. So the other thing that is unique to us women, and I'm glad the men are here because I think they'll get it, and men have taught me this. After all, I was trained exclusively by men when I was growing up. There's a difference between being womanly and leaderly. I had to make up that word, leaderly. But womanly is elusive for us. It means people approve of us when we're what? We're collaborative, we're team builders, we're nice, we make something work better because we've put the group together. We're rewarded for being soft-spoken, for being the team builder and the hardest worker. This will not get you to a position of influence, but it will get you approved of, applauded, and liked. And I say trade that. You don't need people's approval and applause. You need your own sense of appreciation for who you are and where you would like to use yourself at work, in work. And what it means to be leaderly is sometimes to step out of the team, not all the time, and say, follow me, or I disagree, or I don't believe in this. And then all of a sudden, people see you differently. Now the problem is, when you say, follow me, you got to turn around and see if anybody's there. And this is the second part of what we're going to talk about today. How do you get people to follow you? And the simple answer is you become extremely persuasive. So part one is you have to do your homework to understand who you are when the relationships become acutely important. The higher you go, the more you dare, the wider your arena. And you're already inherently brave. I would have never had the guts to start my own business. I walked into companies with a lot of stuff around that I could reorder. And I have to say, if somebody said, here's the space, go make a business, I would faint. You do it every day. You get up every day and you and the telephone or whatever you have, sorry, that's out of date, isn't it? The computer have a meeting about what's going to happen today. When you're leaderly, you begin to master the nature of relationships. So I'd like to tell you a minute about what happened to me when I discovered that work ain't enough. Can you hear me if I'm out here like this? You all right over there? Can you hear? So I was in Chicago at J. Walter Big Fat Famous Rich Thompson Agency. And I was the hottest worker in town. I was the first senior vice president ever named as a woman. You couldn't tell me anything about advertising, marketing, media, strategy, etc. I thought I was such hot stuff. So in order to save my marriage, which is an aside, and I didn't, I went to Tatham. Do you remember Tatham? It was a smaller, medium-sized agency full of some very interesting brands, Procter & Gamble, Ralston Purina, etc., but not at all worldwide, Thompson. And I was destined to be the CEO in a year, and I thought, how bad can that be? It's just more of this same work. I get there, the debt is overwhelming, and the company is a subchapter S. You know what that is? Good, I've forgotten. But it means they could take my daughter's bike if we blow it. This makes me extremely nervous. And this guy is the financial guy, and he's called the women in the company broadies. What have I done, gone back a century? So I don't know who I'm dealing with here. I didn't do my homework, actually. I just jumped because I was so full of how good I did the work. And I found out that the clients didn't just dislike us. They never wanted to see us again. I liked a little more gratitude than that. Where to start? Then I find out the creative department, the complete heart of everything we would have to do since we were in bad shape, left every day at 4 o'clock to go to the bar with the chairman. And when they weren't with him, there was a strange smell coming down the hall, which was marijuana. Not good. I am beginning to spin down. I wake up at 4 every single morning. I know I can't do it. And I also know something, that the men down the hall who are going to partner with me when I'm CEO are not as rattled by the debt, the weird kids in creative, the client stuff. What's wrong with me that I am so unnerved by these messy, complicated relationships? So I get a job offer at a big agency and a little bit lower level. I take it. I tell them I'm coming. Now, just before I took that giant step backward, and you've been at this crossroads, in one moment, in any small moment in your day, when you didn't go forward. Me, I went out. One word stopped me. The next morning, I've already told Byrne, the chairman, I'm leaving. He's crying because he wants to go to Hollywood and write soap operas. And Procter had asked us to do an anonymous review of one another, and I'm reading my reviews, and it says Charlotte is fearless. Now, remember me, the one at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I think, what? And over I read about my bravery, my confidence with the client, and I think, how can anybody be both of these people? And I suspect we all have these places in us. But my job then was to find out who in the heck is this bipolar personality of mine. And I started learning the journey I want you to take. Now, mine was very checkered. My father was an alcoholic. There was a lot of violence in our family. So the drug thing turned me back into a 5-year-old fear as something could go wrong. The men said to me in the meetings, you know, the minute we get a real good debate going, you shut it down. I learned that, you know, to keep things from going wrong. And I unlearned it. I went to children of alcoholic parents. This is embarrassing in Chicago. You know, you have to go there and you learn a lot. So this journey means you study your history, yourself, you watch your behavior, your responses, you course correct, you admit some of it's not pretty. I learned that why I went to work was pure self-sufficiency because my family wasn't secure. And later I learned that I was working for emotional security so I could have a family better than the one I started with. Now these are all kind of mushy things to learn and put into the kitty of how you work, but they power up your ability to know yourself. So when you want to activate the fearless, you know where you're coming from. I mean, I had to be pretty fearless to move to Chicago by myself with my 5-year-old daughter. But I didn't know it and didn't see it like that. On the other hand, I had this kind of control pattern and so on and so on. So I keep the job. We do a really good job together eventually. We die a few times. We win a few. We bring in some amazing women. It was the time when women were just coming in. I mean, and Procter & Gamble had 7 giant agencies in Little Tatham. But I stocked the farm with so many beautiful women, they all came to see us. It was a great tactic. So I hope you'll benefit from that true confession thing so that you say, I got to figure out who I am. And I got closer and closer to understanding I could be this kind of leader, but I wouldn't be this kind. And it was in that period that I learned that women don't lead like men at all, and many of us don't lead like one another anyway. But all you can bring to the party is what you're willing to offer, and where you can stand that speaks to where something is true and fierce in you. Now you take a woman who knows who she is, who is fiercely involved in the situation, and she will not be told no. You know, we're famous for defending our children in such a terrifying way the world winces. Get like that. That's in you anyway. It's just that you have to know where your belief system is, where your conviction is. So let's say you're there. You have been able to do some work and your self-portrait's emerging. And it's bigger than it used to be, and it's more ambitious than you have currently because that's what a portrait is for. You can color in the edges later. And then you begin to take that show on the road, and guess what? Nobody cares. How do you make them care? So one thing you do, and this is, I think, the best part in the book, but I'm not really that focused on it. You can do it anyway without the book. But it's better if you have something helping you. You need to go find out what picture people are holding of you. And I call that consumer research. There's a right way to do that and a wrong way. And if you ask them, how am I doing, they will tell you almost nothing. So you have to trick them into telling you how they really see you. Now, when I'm in management meetings, there's 3 of us, we spend 1 minute on the quality of the work and 20 minutes on myth, legend, rumor, guessing who you are, so that we can say, you're the one we want to do business with. Well, what are we reading? We're reading what makes you tick. So if you want us to count on you, to wait on you, to be influenced by you, that's the magic word, influence. You have to let me know who you are. Now that's the second part of this assignment. Letting people know who you are means you get a different kind of job. Only you can do the interior homework. The second job you can master by becoming a far better communicator. Wherever you are today, you can be better. And there are disciplines involved in mastering communication. Think about your voice. It drives me crazy when I hear women talk in those squeaky little voices. Who's going to listen to that? I was the speaker at Charleston. I lived there sometime. And there were like 600 kids, and the men were all boom, boom, boom. The women going, chirp, 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 chirp. I thought, oh God, who's going to listen to them? So you've got to deal with the reality of the power of your voice. It can be distinct, it can be accented, it can be light and delicate, it can be very many things. But you have to pay attention to all of your communication and call it a stimulus. You know this. This is why he's got that red tie on, why you're wearing a little orange. It's part of who you are. But there are many other facets to it that are born almost intangibly when I speak to you and you speak to me. So the other thing you have to get much better at than I find most people in business situations is the vocabulary. There is nothing more boring than listening to you guys talk about business. You use the jargon, you say the predictable stuff. In order to prove you're in the know, you get up and repeat everything the client knows just so you can get together, and they're already assuming they're not going to hear anything new. So make a vow to always introduce, when it's a meeting of some note or an email or anything, introduce an element of surprise. There's nothing more deadly than predictability. So the word chosen, how original it is, how much it's a part of you. Drag back those words from your family. Words that are unique to me are from Texas sometime. I went to call on the head of Nestle, and I was the chairman and CEO of Ogilvy. And it was pretty clear to everyone that I didn't have a lifetime supply of multinational experience. They weren't too excited. I was trying to make amends for that. I'm really terrified. This is in Vevey, Switzerland. The man is so urbane, he looks like a model for a fashion magazine. And he's walking down the hall with about 3 assistants and me to lunch. I glance at the table. There are like 9 wine glasses at every plate. This is lunch. And he turns to his assistant. He said, "And what language will lunch be in?" Panic. And I said, "I hope it's in Texan. That's my specialty." And he laughed. And he said, "You know, it's so nice to meet a Texan instead of an American." So I'm working it, children. I get sometimes what's unique and what's not. But I'll tell you another story over the plates, if I can. Are you eating a second course? You guys are overfed. You want to hear this other story? Okay, will you allow me to use some obscenity? Hey! So, the purpose of this story, well, I'll let you work that out. So I'm a very young Texas kid working at J. Walter Thompson, and the beer baron has come to town. I mean, he looks cast to be a beer baron. They've shoved me in the back of the room and said, "Sit down, don't say a word." Well, what would I say? I don't even drink beer. So he's 6'4", he's as big as a barn, and when he talks, it sounds like there's a storm coming. The guys are so intimidated by him. It's permeable. So he said, "I don't see what the fuck difference it makes." And then his big head turns to squeaky little me in the corner, and he said, "Oh, excuse me, miss, does my language offend you?" And I know what I'm supposed to say. I'm supposed to say, "Oh, of course not, sir." But I said, "No, I don't mind you're saying the word fuck, unless you understand when you say fuck, I think of you fucking." You know, I just remembered that story the other day. And my daughter said, she's very literal, she said, Mom, nobody in the world would come up with that but you. And I said, that's not the point. The point is, and you know, I was too young to be killed, so the men hated it and I had to go through some grief. But every time that guy came to the agency, he'd say, where's Miss Fuck? I want to tell you how he responded. I want you to remember these two words, stimulus, response. You are preparing a stimulus when you're speaking, and you hope to engender a response. Now, it ain't that easy to remember because you're so busy getting together what you want to say. When I did that utterly surprising remark to me and him, his face crumpled for just a second. He stopped being the bully and the big man. Just a second, you saw that shift. And the room shifted a little. And then he proceeded to fuck up the room quite a bit more. So he wanted to make sure I didn't change his language. But the point is, think about how powerful a word is. Now, when you get better and better at this, the nature of communication, you will practice. That was a practice session for me, kind of inadvertent, but you must speak up, use your voice, step out there, say choose me, and fall down repeatedly. You know, what are you going to do, die? You got another 30 years to work. You might as well get the hang of it. So here's the golden rule. It's not what you say, it's what they hear. You should have this tattooed on your wrist when you're talking, because you get involved in talking and you forget to wonder if they're hearing you, So we've discussed the fact that you use your voice like a messenger. You use words that are original, have an element of surprise or order. You don't apologize. God, the number of times women say, sorry, but. Or you talk so that your voice goes up at the end like you don't mean it. Stomp that out. Say less. There's a great skill in editing down to just the exact words. And the nature of those words has to convey an emotion, a feeling. If you're prepared to talk only logic, data, facts, you're not going to move anyone to another position. Now, you don't need that every day. That's why you haven't learned it. You speak each other in knowledge and PowerPoints and evidence and information, and nothing real has happened unless you say, this is where I stand. This is what I believe. So there was a woman at J. Walter Thompson. There were only two of us, really, who were professionals. And she scared me to death. She had black hair, black eyes, talked like a razor, and the men were tiptoeing around her all the time. And I was young, and I wanted to be like her, but she had hardly acknowledged me. And she was creative, too, totally different ballgame. I walked down the hall, and I hear her talking to men roaring. I slowed down, and I could hear that she was doing a fabulous mockery of my Texas accent. And they were very amused. I was, in that hall, frozen. And for 2 weeks after that, you know, I could hardly get it out. Now, this is one of those times where you have a splendid chance to learn something. So every time you get diminished, where somebody side blames you, where something happens, go forward to the problem for the sake it offers you to learn something. Finally get up the courage, I walk into her office, I shut the door. She looks up and frowns at me. That just about sent me out of the room. And she said, what? And I stood probably like this. I'm not leaving here until you and I agree that we will unite so the men cannot divide or diminish us. And she said, what are you doing for lunch? She took me out and taught me to drink Scotch mist, and I never made it back to the office. But I want you to, I accidentally stumbled on that early meeting under duress. You know what bravery is? It's when there's no other alternative that works. Then you're so desperate you get brave. You'll learn that. You already have learned that, right? Think what happened in the words were exactly the right words with nothing extra, like, oh, I'm sorry, I heard you speaking. I don't do any of that. I was lucky I caught just the thing. And it was years later that I learned I had run across the formula for being a great communicator, at least good. Memorable, precise, and skin in the game. Because my whole career was at stake. I bet I didn't draw at all during that conversation. Think how emotionally laden the words were. I'm not leaving here. Gee, that's a nice opening. Unite, divide, diminish. Highly charged emotional words you don't see in a business email very often. Get those words out on the plate and ask yourself to take a stand. And when you do, don't equivocate. You know, if I ever finish, we're going to have a few questions if you want to do that. I don't see how you can do it over your chicken leg, but maybe you can work it out. So there's another element that's absolutely essential. So you have this self-portrait and you're working on it. You're getting better and better. This is who I am. You're learning, how do you tell people who you are? The absolute best way to tell people who you are is to tell a story. Now you go around, you tell them a story about you and your child at 3 in the morning, that is not going to be riveting. But for instance, I was trying to get my executive women to get much more powerful in their presentations. And this woman stood up and she was reproducing a presentation she made for her clients, and she said, you know, and she was speaking about the fact that no one follows instructions. And she said, my daughter takes her toothpaste, puts it on the brush, swishes it around in this glass of water and drinks it. Well, they all broke up because, I mean, there's a non-follower. And who wants your child drinking toothpaste? But anyway, right away you get this picture of this woman, her sense of humor, her child, and she's become more real. You have to find your stories. You know, on call, I could tell a story about my father in Texas and the sheep herders and the guys from Wyoming. I mean, if I had to, I would give context. And I guess I gathered them around me so that I would keep reminding myself, who am I? Where am I from? And it's been particularly important. For instance, Harvard asked me back to teach my own class, which is so boring because I've already done it, you know, and they use it because they don't have very many women leadership classes. And it's true that you take a calculated risk when you decided to be as distinctive as you can be. So there was a woman professor who left Harvard and went to Annecy, which is out of France. And she's telling me about teaching the Charlotte Beers class. And it's full of Europeans, and they say, we don't like this woman. Yeah, she didn't ask anybody anything. She just pushes it through. And she said, okay. Then she showed them this woman who's with a Swedish utility. And they sat there and sat there and sat there, and they said, God, she's so dull. Give us beers back. So you take a calculated chance. You have different cultures. You have different ethos. You're a lightning rod for understanding what you're facing and what you can adapt to. The danger is you won't hold your own. You won't hold to your own self. You won't risk being distinctive enough. So now we get to that missing link, stimulus response. If you stop thinking about what you want to say once you've hammered it out and you got it down to the fewest possible either visual, like I shut that door into Marion's office, that was a big message. There's a big message, a part of what I was saying. Bam. So you learn to do things that speak louder than your own vocabulary. Your email can be very potent, although it's challenging. But your voice has connotation. Your behavior how you take on something when you're angry. So the missing link is, how are you going to know what the receiver is going to respond to? So you set aside your issues and what you want to get done, and you study that receiver like you'd want to marry them. Come to think of it, that's not a bad idea anyway for marriage. So the receiver, you learn enough about them that you modify your message accordingly. You don't kill the heart of your message, but it doesn't make sense to say something that you can't hear. So in business disagreements, the conversations go past one another, not too unlike home. So now I'm at Tatham, and we have a wonderful, we haven't had any new business from Procter & Gamble in 8 years. That's a little dangerous. And we're doing some new work. I won't go call on the chairman, which is the privilege at Procter, until I know who this receiver is. So I begin to learn who John Smale is. It's gossip, it's myth, it's legend, it's written. And then I start thinking about what's the stimulus and what do I want out of this meeting. I can't throw away a meet and greet meeting. I can't wait for the world to come around because we're on the edge of being fired. So my two partners go with me and introduce me. They're both 6'4", and all they start talking about is fishing. And John Smale is a fisherman. I think at the rate we're fishing, we're all going to drown here. I break into the trout story, and I said, Mr. Smale, here's the newest information on Head and Shoulders. He dropped the casual conversation like a bomb because I knew something about Smale. He used to be the brand manager on Head and Shoulders. Once a brand manager, always a brand manager. And then I brought him a present, very good tactic in a big meeting like that. The present was insider knowledge about some research about that universe of Head and Shoulders that no one else knew. It's nice to be in the loop. But I close by saying, I would like to have a meeting with you next week. I have a proposition for you. Think of the language. My two partners almost swooned. First of all, I've ignored the first meeting because it's just courtesy. I want a real meeting. And then I don't say, I'd like to ask you for a favor. Doesn't that sound different? So remember, proposition has, from a man to a woman, a really interesting tension. I'm using it quite deliberately. So when we meet, I say to him, I know a lot now. I know that Procter & Gamble never rewards current performance with brands if you have to wait till you're dead. And we're practically dead. So I said, Mr. Smale, if Head and Shoulders comes through a new share level, which I think it will because we have this beautiful new work, I'm guessing, would you please reward us with the brand right away? Now he starts telling me, oh, no, we never do that, we never do that. Now, quid pro quo is part of these important moments of persuasion. What does that mean? That means there's something in it for them. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're going to get, if you want somebody to give you a raise, you have to include in that why they will benefit. You do. The minute you start thinking like that, you'll find your whole tone is different. So I said, look, I know that rule. I see the importance of it, but you have a larger rule that's far more vital. You say to us everywhere, as agents, a good agency in high momentum is priceless to Procter & Gamble. This reward and recognition will change our culture. And he smiles a little and he said, well, I'll think about it. As I'm leaving, I turn around and once again, I'm only standing from my own conviction. I said, I can't do it alone. I didn't know I was going to say that. It's really too personal. I am the new woman CEO. I must look pretty alone. Those two guys that introduced me are on the way out, and he didn't like them very much. Well, maybe he's thinking, we could help her. I don't know if he did. We got the brand. The sales went up, we got the brand. It was literally the moment when Tatham began to turn around. Persuasive communication is not a small thing to master. Do you believe that? You have examples in your own history. If I had to tell you today, you could pick up a story, and what you would do in the story is first tell what happened that went well. That's not the story. What the story is how the stimulus altered the response in such a way that something new took place. It's very like the creative process. Something new is formed. Think about the underpinning of that example. I don't go till I know the receiver. I bring a present, which is the relevance of him to Head and Shoulders. I give him a quid pro quo, which is, the truth is, a successful Tatham is totally in your interest because they don't fire agencies generally, and we're just struggling. And maybe the fourth thing is, I'm in there for the long haul, and I've explained it. I've promised. I can't do this without you, but I am going to do it. I hope comes across. So those are kind of the three-legged stool or four-legged stool of communicating. You need to think about your self-portrait, and as you get it shaped up, try to surprise yourself and others with the picture you make in the meeting. If you behave exactly the same way every time, we fail today. Because there are components and elements and qualities of you that need to be pulled up and out. The most despairing thing would be if somebody says, I always know what she's going to say. Please, give an element of surprise. I was once printed up in a profile in the New York Times called by one of my associates as totally unpredictable. That was not meant to be a compliment. And yet I liked it a little bit. You know, you don't always know. So why are you doing this stuff? You're working so that not only can you be a larger estimate of who you are when you do give up those 92 days and years of working, but you're also doing that work so you can use up all of you that would not be used at home. You know, we have all these roles to play, and I think women are particularly fortunate. The men have the same roles, but in different proportions. But we women have the role of mother, daughter, lover, parent. And then we have worker. You don't want to confuse what you want to offer in each one of those roles. And I think that's why we're susceptible sometimes to going to the agreement that we'll be the nice little woman and do all the work and have our head down. I'll tell you a statistic that these women have given me every time we meet when they talk about characteristics that distinguish men from women. The most telling one is that men work vertically, right up the ladder. They know who's on top, they're untouched, they're engulfed, they're doing it. What do? We work horizontally. We bring everybody along. So while you're doing this, they're up there getting the promotion. Knock it off. No offense, guys. A number of the men I know have told me this. I had this woman that she's now a real star, but at the time she was constantly critiquing herself. In her first self-portrait, she had this yappy mouth going. That was her head telling her how stupid she was in the last meeting. Do you do that? You self-critique yourself? I mean, I still do. But there's a degree of that that's harmful and disruptive to you. That's not doing self-inventory, that's diminishment. So she finally comes up with a self-portrait that she's a little girl in the corner with a gun. This is pretty intimidating. I said, it's a lot of power there. Are you using the gun or whatever? So she moves and morphs. I can't take you through that whole story, but I'm not sure that you need it. She handicapped herself by she thought she was a very fast and good judge of people. And you know, women are good at this proportionately. We can intuit something. The trouble is sometimes it freezes us. While the men are less maybe perceptive, they're also not thrown off. So the head of the office from New York came to London, where she lives, and she said, he doesn't like me. And I said, gee, how'd you find that out? Did you have a date? And she said, therapy? She said, no. He walked by my office without speaking. Whoa, that's a big one. And then she said, when I was presenting in this key meeting, he didn't even look up. And I said, you know what? You need to get on it. He needs to know who you are. I'm going to wait 10 minutes for you to call New York and ask him for a meeting. And she said, no, I can't do that. I mean, I think he's arrogant and he's indifferent. And I said, 10 minutes. She walked out, placed the call, and by sheer accident, because we were in London, she got his secretary and she said, oh, I think he'd love to see you. And she thought, yeah. She got the meeting, she went to see him, and he said, I can't tell you how I appreciate your coming to me. I know how busy you are too. Total transferal of expectations, assumptions. She got to know the receiver, and she got promoted to be the top woman at Ogilvy London, and now globally. But she could be her own handicapper, and sometimes I think we're vulnerable to that. So this rather highly concentrated immersion into how to say what you mean and then get what you want, that's a nice one, is not satisfying to me, frankly, because I don't ever hear back from you guys. And I do a lot of this speaking, and I find that there's not a to and fro. I want to know. I want to know what stories you're shaping yourself, and these stories you have will inform others. So I'm forming with a group of the women I've been teaching something called the club. And if you want to be a member of the club, you just have to put your name down, and we're starting it. We're going to get really good at this. It's charlottebeers1@gmail.com. Send your name in, and we'll get you on the roller list. What we're going to do is pull out of all the stuff that comes at you one or two things, like a whole month of stimulus response, my stories, but better. The executive women whose life is daily bread now, modern grief, their stories. And then when they go out and you use it, you actually use some of this, your story will come back in and be posted. And I think we'll start the circle. I mean, there's so many of these going on now. I want you to know what to do tomorrow that will change how it is you're working. I'm not interested in telling you to be confident. I'm trying to give you the exact tools that force you to take that step forward. And you know, I work a lot with men too, because no one solved the leadership matrix. You know, you have to raise your hand. In the world of work, these are my definitions. I use them at Harvard because they talk about leadership as though it were some extremely complex formula and strategic thing. All day long you do, you manage, and you lead. And if you're not clear which one of those life cycles you're in, you can put the wrong person in the wrong cycle. So I've known many a manager who was supposed to be a leader and he blew it. Because leadership is really different from managing. So let me give you a fast definition of my idea. Doer is doing. So much fun. God, I wish they'd leave me alone. I'll do it myself. Remember that? Well, now, if you get anywhere at all in the world, you have to bring in other people and get them to do it. And then every now and then you get the privilege of doing it again. And when I went to the State Department, I didn't know how to do anything they were doing. I became a doer again, even though I had just been very full of myself for being a CEO at an ad agency. They didn't care. I mean, I couldn't even repeat the initials of CTA, CIA, NSA, and so on. Managers, here's what managers do. Think about this because I know all of you are managers. Managers create the environment in which the best work goes forward. So you're weather controllers. If you stay with that thought, it'll keep you on the right path because you won't fall into the team. You won't support just a few people because they like you. And leaders are like this. This is a big A leader steps out into the unknown, where there are no proofs, and says, follow me. That's a leader. So the distinction is very important. You need really different skills. Now, the world is very proof obsessed. What is this blinking? Is it an opinion, a poll, or is it a warning to stop? Is it you? Honey, we've done enough pictures, I think. So think about doer, manager, leader. So when you're being a manager, what skills do you need? You do need to be a collaborator. You need to motivate people. You hire, you fire. This is very satisfying and essential work. But one day there will come a moment of leadership. Don't miss it. You might miss it because you're so busy being a manager. That moment is when you step out into the unknown and say, I don't think this is right. And you know, the way you'll get the guts to do that is you'll practice doing it in small ways so that you gather around you what it looks like to break the rules, to be a maverick, to step out. And I wish I had time to tell you how many times my willingness to step out of the group kept me in leadership mode. And as a woman, I would do that very differently than a man would do it. So the club is charlottebeers1@gmail.com. Come if you can, and we'll create a better and deeper dialogue. Now, there's one last story that I told last night at dinner, and I was thinking about what a great summation of all I've been trying to say this is. So I work for Colin Powell. I mean, he's a honey bun. You may think and I saw somebody today, and they reminded me because they had a lot of colored ribbons on their shoulder. My goodness, the medals this man had. If he decided to get full dressed, I swooned. Those medals were so beautiful. So I was Undersecretary of Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. And we were worrying about Brand America. Now, this is not going well. We have Afghanistan, which you all remember, because it followed 9/11. We didn't intend to be in government in that time, but we were. Then we do Iraq, and we have a total change in the world's feelings about Brand America. Secretary Powell goes to Davos, which is, you know, an international conference of some of the world's great thinkers, and often includes both political and business and foreign affairs. And he spoke, and he got almost no applause, unheard of for Secretary Powell. There was so much hostility toward the United States. And some very well-acknowledged foreign affairs experts said, why is it, Secretary Powell, that the U.S. chooses to use hard power instead of soft power? And in that world, you know, hard power is military and soft is diplomacy. And I actually physically saw a man change his manner and stance. And he said, it was not soft power that saved Europe in the Second World War when the United States sent our young men and women to these shores. And all we ever asked for was the land to bury them on. And the room rose in an ovation. Transform your audience with what? Look at the components. The man was Secretary of State, but what portrait did he step into to make his statement? Soldier. Once a soldier, always a soldier, still a soldier. Who was qualified to answer like that? Not the Secretary of State, but the soldier was. And why was he ready with those words? Because he felt so deeply about that, you couldn't deny he had skin in the game. And what they stood and applauded was not what we were doing in Iraq, but what we had done over the years. And he brought it back to life. Why don't you be like that? Why don't you be that memorable? Why don't you be convincing? Why don't you get ready for a moment when you step into your true portrait and you can say, follow me, and there'll be 2 or 3 people behind you. or hundreds? Well, I'm done.